Oh, hi there. Ollie Anderson here. You're listening to Creative Status. This is a podcast about using your creativity as a vehicle for growing more real, allowing the true version of who you are to come to the surface so you can express something true in the world. If you don't know, my name is Ollie Anderson. I'm a creative performance coach, which means I help people to bring more realness into their life and business. That's enough of a rambling introduction. Today's episode of Creative Status is an interview with Myrthe Peters. She is a doula. If you don't know, a doula is somebody that helps people through life transitions. In the case of Myrthe, we're talking about the transition of death, dropping dead, demising, things being done and dusted. It's a very real conversation about one of my favorite topics, which is death. The reason that it's one of my favorite topics is because if you can appreciate the fact that we're all going to die one day, then it allows you to step back from any static ideas that might be causing you to hesitate in life. It allows you to appreciate that your time, energy, and attention are the most important things that you have. And it can serve as fuel for speeding up the process of making the unreal real so you can live a life that's actually true to you and in an expression of the things that you care about, your true values and intentions. So that's enough of an intro. Here's the actual interview. Myrthe, thank you so much for your time, and everybody else. Hope you get some good shit out of this and that it helps you live a better life. Here we go. Oh, hi there, Myrthe. Thank you so much for joining me today on Creative Status. You are super obsessed with one of my favorite topics of all time, which is death. And I'm hoping that we're about to have a kind of free-flowing, enjoyable conversation about what many people fear more than anything else. But before we do that, do you feel like introducing yourself, letting people know what you do? And also, could you share what you'd like to get from this conversation as a whole?
Thank you so much for having me here, Ollie. It is really awesome to have this opportunity to speak about this topic that both of us really enjoy delving into. My name is Myrthe, and I work in the end-of-life space as a doula. A doula is someone who offers practical, emotional, and spiritual support during significant transitions in life. And my area of focus is the end of life.
Wow.
That is obviously a very broad spectrum. And I'm sure that we will get to know more about the different facets of that later on in our conversation. And besides that, I also work as a psychedelic facilitator. I mainly work with psilocybin and using psilocybin as a way to access our grief and to also become familiar with death.
Wow.
Is hugely powerful. And it's a real privilege to be working in this space.
Yeah, like I can imagine that's, even though, you know, a lot of people think death is depressing and everything, it's also, I would assume, very intimate, the way that you end up relating to people, because obviously a lot of their, you know, the things they've been hiding their whole lives are probably going to come to the surface, either with the mushroom stuff or with just the fact that death is imminent and coming towards them. What are some of the benefits that you personally get of being a doula? Like, what do you enjoy about it?
I really enjoy being in a space where there is an opportunity to explore the deeper emotions. For me, allowing emotions and embracing all of those as part of who we are is where all these golden nuggets lie in terms of how we live our lives. What aligns, what doesn't, what is truth, what isn't. And during when we talk about death, it's all about that, right? Because when we look at an end, it requires us to examine what is still unfinished. So to be able to do that with people is really, really profound. And as you said, it's intimate. It's very intimate. Lots of beautiful stuff can come from that. And it's also really hard. And that's probably also what most people associate death with. It's that it's hard, it's challenging, it's painful, and it's all of that. But there is also this really intimate and beautiful side to it that allows for deeper connections between people and for old wounds to be healed.
Wow. I think what I find so amazing and fascinating about the whole death thing is kind of what you just alluded to. So death always answers the question, what is the truth? What is real? And like in my work, which, you know, I do a lot of coaching and stuff like that, but it's all about realness, which just means finding something that is real about ourselves and the world and reality. And I have found that death and accepting death is one of the quickest doorways into understanding all that. Because, you know, there's so much bullshit in the world, right? Like people will argue about pretty much anything, but one thing that we all agree on, or let's say 99.9% of people agree on, because there's always somebody that disagrees. We all agree that death is coming. And in this form that we found ourselves in currently as individuals, it's going to end no matter what. And as soon as you accept that and you open up to it, it's like life just, it gets turned on. The volume goes up. The intensity is a lot higher than it was, purely because you've introduced the truth. And so is there something there around that actually what you're doing, yeah, you're helping people with these transitions and you're helping them to come to terms with the fact that they're going to die and blah, 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 all the emotions that brings up. But ultimately, are you just guiding people back to a relationship with the truth?
100%. And I love how you explained it. I love how you said, when we come to the acceptance of the inevitability of you know, our lives, that is what turns up these buttons and makes us live more fully. It's so very true, because when we enter that space of, okay, something is final and it's very final, right? Which is incredibly hard for the mind to grasp, because the mind that is not meant to be dealing with finality of events. But this is the most final event that we will ever encounter. And all of us will. So there's going to have to be that point where we go, all right, let's sit down and look at this. Let's be with this. Let's explore what we want this to look like. What do we want this to feel like? Who do we want to have present? What kind of senses do we want to bring in? Grief is also a huge part of this. And I mean, we can talk about, or this sounds really as if we're only talking about death in the sense of physical death, our physical mortality. However, it extends way beyond that, because so many other things of us die. It's old identities, it's relationships, it's the ending of specific life cycles. It's, you know, our skin dies, our eyes die. So it's all of that. Death is constantly around us. And I believe the more familiar we get with death and dying and grief and loss before we have to, the more profound it could be when it's really there. And I would know this obviously until I get to that point myself. But from the work I've been doing, I can see how much fuller my life is becoming. Because ultimately, like, we are all on this journey, and our search for truth or transformation, or however you want to call it, it's just different names for, I think, the same thing. But yeah, they all go hand in hand, and exploring it beyond the physical death is also a really big part of it.
I think what it boils down to is there's a false dichotomy, which is, you know, life and death. they're not separate things. It's all one process. It's all the creative flow. Reality is constantly moving. It's constantly undulating and flowing and expanding and blah, blah, blah. And the only thing that stops human beings as individuals from flowing with that is what I consider to be the only true death. I'm saying that in scare quotes, and that is the ego. As soon as you attach to a static self-image that ultimately causes you to resist this flow of life and death that is constantly moving around us, as soon as you attach to that, that's when you start to have problems in life, ultimately, right? And so what you're talking about is guiding people back to that truth, ultimately, which is the truth of flux. The stasis is an illusion, basically. And as soon as you buy into it, then you're going to have a bad time. And so even though I'm assuming a lot of your work as a doula is with people, who are approaching the end of their lives quite quickly, all of the lessons that you guide them through in order to reach a state of acceptance, it applies to everybody else as well. Because no matter who you are and how close death may be or may not be, it's the same basic laws of life, which is that flow is always guiding you towards that state of unknown finality that you're talking about. So I guess the question is, what lessons have you learned by working with people at the very end of their lives that, are applicable at all stages of life? So so I won't put words in your mouth, but what do you think about that?
So what I think about that is that the most or the biggest regrets for people at the end of their lives, the first one is that people have been scared too long to live their truth, to live their authentic selves. So really attaching to the ego and to status and to performance and to societal structures that may not really have resonated with them. So that's one. The other one is mending relationships too late. So being stubborn and wanting to be right about something, not having the courage to apologize, and losing time, basically.
Yeah.
Losing time, meaningful time for connection.
Yeah. That's ultimately what it all boils down to. And I was kind of going to say that. So the reason that I have personally found death to be such a powerful force in my life is, first of all, I just think it's cool to go around talking about death. It makes me seem really edgy and everything. But the other thing is that it makes me value my time. So I think I told you, we had a chat before the actual podcast recording, and there was a period in my life where I was being very morbid. I went through some personal stuff and I was just waking up every day and I was thinking about death. I'm like, oh, I'm going to die one day. And, but that actually became a very empowering thing, because instead of sitting around feeling miserable and getting into a victim mindset and all that kind of stuff, the fact that I knew I was going to die one day did two things. One, it made me really, really present. I can't think about death and not just exist in the present moment, because I know that I'm flowing towards it in the way that we were talking about. It puts us into that flow. But the second thing, it made me value my own time and my own energy and the choices that I made with those things. And for me, now, not 100% of the time, because I'm just a flawed human being, believe it or not, but most of the time, I am aware of the choices that I'm making and what I want to do with my life. So every day, I always say to myself, I'm trying to make the choice towards wholeness rather than fragmentation.
Yeah.
But knowing that time is precious makes that so much easier, because everything has an opportunity cost. So why do you think most of us do not live in that way? So time is precious for all of us, but there's something going on psychologically and maybe even spiritually or whatever that causes us not to value our own lives, basically, and our own time?
I believe that part of that is fear for the unknown,
Yeah.
fear for the why can I not pronounce this word now? For the finality of
Yeah.
it, and it can come with some dread, right? All the preparations that we really would benefit from looking into,
Wow.
the avoidance of feelings around this. So many people are very uncomfortable with intense feelings.
Yeah.
So they believe that when they just don't deal with it right now,
Yeah.
it won't be there.
Yeah.
And then obviously when it comes knocking, it's going to be way more intense because
Oh, wow.
they've not practiced. They've not practiced being in that space of extreme vulnerability.
Do you think it's
And
possible?
also when holding space for the people around us who are going through a process or the process.
Do you think it's possible to overcome the fear of death? Like, when we say we're scared of death, okay, we say we're scared of the unknown and we're scared of the inevitable and all these things. But what are we really scared of? Like, do you think it's deeper than that? Like people are always talking about how we're all afraid of uncertainty and we hate getting out of our comfort zones. But what are we really afraid of? Like when that's happening? Like if you dig into it, say again, sorry.
It's life. I think we are scared of life because when we look at death, we have to look at our lives.
Yes. Yeah. And it's holding a mirror up to us. It's showing us who we really are and what human beings really are. And it's showing us what's real. And so I think if people have that fear, they only have it because they haven't accepted the realness of themselves. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. And I want to add to that with acknowledging or sitting with that fear, with looking at what is actually scaring them from their lives or, in their space, in the here and the now, they don't do that because it would mean that they have to make changes. And that takes work, that takes energy, that takes time, that takes effort.
I think there's an element as well where I personally think you can't lose anything real. So, I've said 1,000,003 times now on this podcast, and I've probably said it to you before, but like human beings just have a natural drive towards wholeness. Like we're constantly moving and expanding towards wholeness. That's the natural state. But the ego and the identities that we carry are made of fragments. They're made of concepts. They're made of ideas. They're made of fears about things, like you've said. All these negative fragmentary things that we pick up, they cause us to go into hiding. And so when we go into hiding and we become fragmented, we create the ego, which keeps the shadow of self at bay. And the truth becomes a threat, even though the truth is the thing that we actually all need, because the truth is wholeness. And that's what we ultimately want to move towards. And so when we're in that state, we pick up all of these illusions, and we need these illusions to be the truth so that we don't have to face, all of the things that we need to hide from ourselves to keep the ego in place. I don't know if I'm making that too convoluted, but when we're in that state, that's when we pick up all these ideas that we are not human beings, that we're something else. And by that, all I mean is, human beings in reality are these creatures that keep flowing, keep expanding, keep evolving, ultimately towards death, where they just return to wholeness completely and the system of nature that built them and all that kind of thing. They forget that they're human in that way. They forget that they don't think life is what life is, because they only want to look at life and not the dichotomy of life and death, which is really the same thing. So blah, blah, blah. They pick up all these illusions, and the fear of death is actually just the fear of seeing that those illusions were never real. If something like that. And so what's going on is when people have this fear is, there's a saying I'm always throwing out as well, like what goes up must come down. And if you've been up in the air, like on cloud nine, hiding out in your illusions for a long time, then the fall back down to earth is a lot harder, basically. So is this something there? Like, I'm talking at you a lot, I apologize, but is there something going on there that's actually valid?
Yeah. What I would like to explore further actually is that with this, do we operate, or do these beliefs and these behaviors, where are they actually coming from? Sometimes I really think about the society that we live in, how we lack a specific purpose or a meaning in our day to day. Like, we get up, we may have breakfast at the, on the fly. We go to work, we sit behind the screen. I'm generalizing now. We go home, we might go to the gym. We come home, make dinner, watch TV, go to bed, and we do that for a really long time, right?
Yeah.
What is the meaning in that? And how does our society feed us to stay disconnected from a bigger purpose? Because why do we go to work? We go to work to make a paycheck, because the paycheck provides us with a roof over our head. It provides us with food on our plates. It's kind of like this way of living that we can't really escape. But maybe so many more people would like to, but they just are so stuck in this rut because there is no other option for them to see or to act upon. So this ego gets that status is maintained that way. So is it more of a systemic fear that's instilled upon us, more so than a human being one?
Wow. So there's loads going on there, but like, I totally agree. But it's kind of like there's an interplay between the psychology of the people in the system and the systems that we build. And obviously there's like socio-economic and political things going on that cause people in the system to have less power over their lives than they would if we had a more real society and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, the short version, I would say, is society is structured around survival. It's only about surviving. And when people are in that survival mentality, two things happen. One, it's fear-based and scarcity-based. And two, it's fragmented. It's basically a collective version of the individual ego. So the ego of individuals, I think, is created as a denial of what life actually is. So what we're saying about, everything, it been in flux and death been an inevitable thing that happens and all that kind of stuff. Society is built around the same fears, actually. And so when we deny the truth about life, which is that we are all going to die and that actually there's nothing to be afraid of. Like, I really believe that, because you can't lose anything real. Like, when I die, like, there will be no more Ollie Anderson, but Ollie Anderson is just an idea anyway. It's just my identity. It never exists. It never existed in the first place. But all of the things that are whole about me are just going to return to the whole. And so when you understand that, you realize, okay, I'm going to be here now. I'm going to basically live my best life if I can by choosing a purpose that is aligned with what needs to be expressed from within me. And when I express that, then I don't have to worry about life being meaningful, because purpose precedes meaning and it will become naturally meaningful. But because society is built around everybody needing to survive, because they're all scared of dying, basically, which, it's a rational thing, I suppose, if you're living in the short term. But anyway, because society is built around that, it's become a vacuum for purpose and meaning. Because really, the only way that you will find as an individual, the only way you'll find your true purpose in life is to start by accepting life for what it is. So if you don't accept that it's going to end one day, then you're not going to make the choices with your time, energy, and attention, like we were talking about, then you're not going to move towards wholeness. And then, yeah, you're going to live like in the rat race, ultimately, just being told what to do because your life is dictated by external forces, which are not reality, God or truth or wholeness or any of that stuff. Your life is being dictated by the system, basically, which is not real. And if the system is built in a survivalist way rather than something that allows you to thrive and be real, then you're going to have a bad time. And that's why if you want to, escape the matrix, whatever you want to say, you have to wake up to the fact that you're going to die. And that is the starting point of liberation, basically, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. You put that beautifully. I would love to hear from you. What has been your biggest tool to really live by this, other than accepting death?
Yeah, for me,
But
it's
in practical terms, how do you do this on a let's say frequent basis?
I think it's, for me personally, like I had a Kickstarter program I went through, let's call it that. So I had some like serious health issues. So I nearly died a few times, and I was in a coma and all this kind of stuff. I had a kidney transplant that went wrong. That's the short version. And going through that, it just showed me that, first of all, life is precious. Secondly, because I thought I was going to die in the aftermath of that anyway, I went through this process of, just thinking about all this stuff. And then eventually it went from thinking to actually integrating it. And then slowly over time, it just affected the choices that I made. Obviously, there's all these basic things you can do. Like people always say, you should meditate and you should journal and you should go walk in nature and, I don't know, get some crystals or something and just feel one with everything. And you can do all that stuff. But for me, it came down ultimately to realizing my time is really precious. Like my time is so precious. I am not going to give it to any bullshit just because that's what I've been told to do. And there was a process actually that I had to go through of reconfiguring my life. Like I had, arguments with people and all kinds of things who wanted me to live in the way that you're supposed to live. And actually what I have learned is that, it's what I just said, actually, the system we have created does not want you to live your life. The system wants you to basically pay your taxes and then die. That's ultimately what you're educated to do if you go through the standard education system and all that stuff. And that is what a lot of people think that they have to do, and they're afraid to go against that programming. And so for me, the practical thing I did was just be stubborn, to be honest. Like initially, I was very stubborn, not in I didn't ruin any relationships or anything, but I was stubborn in the sense of knowing what I wanted, figuring out my values, and then turning them into behaviors and goals, and then sticking to it. And it hasn't been easy, I'll be honest, especially in the initial transition, but that is ultimately it. It's a test. I've found it's a test of your faith in life, because eventually if you live in this way that we're talking about, your faith is not put in the world. Your faith has to be in something higher. You can call it, God or source or whatever, all these different words people use, but you have to find a way to trust that flow. And that process of learning to trust the flow will be slightly different for all of us based on the bullshit that we're carrying in our minds and that we have to let go of. But it's always the same path. So I'm always, I'm a broken record. And sorry, I'm talking loads in this podcast, but it's about going from fragmentation to wholeness. So it's just asking yourself, what does wholeness look like in my life? And you will never find that in the system. You have to find a way to get back on your own path, basically. So it's figuring out what's distracting you. And that's ultimately why the death thing is so important, right? Because death is not a distraction. It shows you where you are distracting yourself.
Yeah. And it also, this makes me think a lot about psychedelic journeys and how they are such a beautiful gateway into a deeper understanding of our psyche, and explore in such a safe way what our true values are and what is stopping us to live by those values and to, even practice death during journeys. Like, it's possible for us to become very familiar with endings, and that can be endings of any kind.
What are some of the main things that you've learned from the work you do with psychedelics? So,
I have learned that all of us are, in a sense, actually, we're all in a way really lonely.
Wow.
We all experience a particular type of loneliness that is so individual, yet there is this collective. When we come together, we all have it. And it's like, where is this disconnect coming from? It's something that baffles me more and more, because the loneliness, like, it's a fucking killer. Like, sorry.
It's like, I swear all the fucking time.
It really is. Yeah. Also, when we look at elderly people and how they get through that final stage of their lives, and how loneliness becomes really magnified for many of them.
Wow.
Because of the way that they, live in our white society, in nursing homes, and less family time, and all of that. But really, it's also very present in our age group. I reckon it's also really present in younger kids.
Wow.
So where is that disconnect? How is it possible that we find it so hard to join in that, and to recognize, hey, we are really all experiencing a feeling that maybe consists of a variation in frequency. How can we join to bring that frequency into a more into a similar range?
Wow. Well, I really wasn't expecting you to say what you just said about loneliness, but it's kind of blown my mind a little bit. So are you saying, like, this is a societal thing? Like, it's mainly in the West. There's like, everyone's lonely and disconnected. Or are you saying that's the human condition? Like, wherever you are, we're all ultimately alone. Like, you one of the, is that what you're saying?
I am saying that the people who I've worked with and am working with, they are all experiencing that, and myself included. Like, I have moments where I find it really hard to connect to people around me, because I feel misunderstood, because I feel like I don't necessarily fit in. Like, it's that belonging, that story of belonging. Where is our place in society? I'd be really interested to explore what this is like for people from different cultures. I have a few ideas, because when we, for example, look at the more traditional communities, there is way more space for for the collective, for solving issues and challenges as a community. There is space for ritual. There is lots more nature.
That's why. That's what I was thinking. So ultimately, human beings are mammals, and if we're living in accordance with that nature, then obviously we're going to live in the way you just talked about. We're going to have basically going to have bottom-up societies where, people work together. The communities have got stronger bonds than they do in the atomized, alienated Western industrial society we live in, and all these kind of things. And either there's two possible things that could be going on here, right? So either the human condition is that even in that best case scenario where we're living like mammals, even in that case, we're still kind of alone in the world. Like, we might have moments where we feel connected to, the other people in our tribe and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's that thing, we all die alone. So that could be an option. Or maybe like in those tribal societies, like they're all one with nature and they don't even really appreciate that there's a big difference between me and you and blah, 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 blah. And this loneliness that you've uncovered with the work that you do is because in industrial societies, basically, or in societies that have been informed by the structure of the Industrial Revolution and blah, 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 well, in those societies, people basically go into hiding, don't they? They lose touch. There's all the stuff we were saying about the rat race. They don't value their own time because they're supposed to go work in the factories or whatever it is. They get ennui, that, existential dread and boredom and all those things. And it's because they don't know who they are. They're out of touch with themselves. Or it could be a bit of both. So like we are all ultimately alone, but we can forget about that if we live in the right way. But maybe that's a distraction. So maybe the question here is, there's a thing in there, like most religions will say, I think, I might be spreading misinformation, but I've definitely heard this before, that like, we all die alone, basically. So like at the end of your life, you might have people around you on your deathbed, but it's still just you and death, or you and life, death, whatever you want to call it. So what do you think is the truth there based on what you've seen?
Well, actually, I wanted to add something to, I just wanted to circle back to the loneliness belonging topic, because what also very often comes out of a psychedelic journey, when done with purpose and intention, obviously, is it's an opportunity to reconnect to that oneness.
Yes.
So, depending obviously on what type of medicine you use, it can vary a little bit, but really it's this tool to break down the barrier, the fragmentation, the ego, however you want to call it, to come closer to our authentic self, our inner child, or, the elder within us, however we want to call it. And there's also then this magical moment where people can realize that really we are all one. And we are also one with whatever is going on beyond us. What is going on beyond our five senses.
I personally think that is the ultimate truth. Like wholeness is reality. And part of the reason that people feel so lonely is because, what we're saying, they live out a pantomime, basically. They're playing the character of the ego, which is just all of their, social conditioning and emotional conditioning to some extent, or self-hypnosis in an attempt to keep their own emotional stuff at bay. And, I'm assuming, like, when people are doing these psychedelic ceremonies and the ego slips away, they see in those moments how they are the cause of their own loneliness, how they're holding themselves back from just connecting with other people. And it might be, the way that they think about themselves, the way they, have prejudice about other people. Maybe they just have an emotional block. Like I've met people who, I won't name names. There's people in my family, like traditionally, most of the time, they're very kind of uptight and stoic and everything. But if you get a few drinks in them, they'll be opening up and telling everybody how much they love everyone and stuff like that. But it's like you can tell it's weird for them to do that. And I think a lot of the time that it probably just goes back to childhood programming or something like that.
Yeah.
But the main barrier to loneliness is us. There is no loneliness, isn't it? Not really in reality. Like in two levels, like at the level of other human beings, there's 8 billion of us on the planet. So really, if you take an active approach to it, you can probably find somebody to talk to, right? If you're lonely. It might take some work, obviously. Like they're not just going to knock on the door. You might have to be active. But okay. But even I think if other human beings aren't involved, if you can connect to that wholeness, if you can connect to this flow that we're talking about, it's impossible. You can't be lonely. Do you know what I mean? Like if you feel that, well, that is you. Like you're connecting to the real you, but you're connecting to everything else. And that makes me sound like a massive hippie. I don't care, but like you can't be lonely if you've been real, because it's not about loneliness anymore. It's about solitude. Do you know what I mean? There's a difference.
There's a difference, and the difference is it lies also in how we view it. That we are looking very often to the external world to fill these voids and to as if we are expecting from our environment to give us permission or to hype us up to live our true selves. But it's not like that. Like we are the only ones who can do that for ourselves. Like we put this expectation on the people around us, whereas we have no right to do that.
100%. Like I actually think loneliness just means that you're alone somewhere, but it's just you and your ego, because you've bought into that illusion of status we were talking about. So you're alone, and then your ego is saying all these things. Oh, I should be with other people. Oh, this thing that I did 10 years ago is, I'm such an asshole, whatever it is. Your ego is just judging you. That's what loneliness is. It's you sitting there with your ego. Solitude, externally, it looks like the same thing. Like to a passive observer, like you're still there by yourself, but solitude, you're alone, but you're with reality. You're in the present moment. You're flowing still.
Moment, you're alive.
Yeah, and you're moving. You're still moving with reality. You're not holding yourself back with the ego stuff. So personally, I don't think loneliness is real. I think, it's a weird thing to say, maybe. I've never said that in my life, but I don't think loneliness is real. I think you can feel lonely, but if you are feeling lonely, that is a sign that you need to think about death, basically, because if you can think about death, you're going to realize, okay, I need to go in this direction, not that direction.
Yeah, true. I have another question for you, because I'm curious how you feel about this. When we talk about all of this stuff and, how as in our society, there's not really an opportunity to live by our truth, to explore emotions, to show up with all our vulnerability, because we are a performance-based driven society. So what do you think would happen if we would already introduce very specific work around emotions and vulnerability and having deep, meaningful conversations at a very young age? So I'm thinking school, like primary school kids, their life could look so different if we allowed them to really express themselves. And what do? We guide them into tasks where they have to draw within the lines, or make like creativity in school. What does that mean? It means that we copy things. It means that we have very limited resources. Most resources, they are inside. How is that creativity? I believe that creativity and the expression of our emotions leads to more creativity. And what does creativity bring as well? Means that we get to explore what we want our lives to look like.
So we can create ourselves. Exactly. I'm really glad that you asked this question, because I totally forgot that this podcast was about creativity. So like ultimately, the way that I see the creative process, it's about making the unconscious conscious. That's it. Like it can literally be anything, but ultimately it's about putting yourself in this process we've been talking about of being present enough to allow what needs to emerge in life to emerge and to go with it without holding yourself back. And so whether it's a creative conversation, like a dialogue, like we're doing now, whether you're painting a picture, whether you're sitting down as a doula and you're guiding somebody back into life so they can accept themselves, all of those things are creative, right? And all that's going on is we're making realities or truths that weren't conscious because they were either out of sight or they were buried beneath the ego stuff, we're allowing that to come up to the surface. And the healthiest thing I believe any of us can do, no matter, how old we are or whatever, the healthiest thing we can do is learn to navigate that process of fragmentation to wholeness, of unconscious to conscious, in a way that serves us and our vision for whatever we think is going to bring meaning to our lives. And that ultimately is something that we should help children to learn. Everybody should have those skills, basically, right? But the problem is, it's like we were saying, like, there's always talk about reforming the education system and things like that. Everybody agrees that we should reform the education system. Nobody really had a nice time in school. We might have had. Nobody really thinks that the current education system is the best version, right? You learn all these facts and figures. You remember them by rote. You do some tests, and then you leave, and then you never use like 80% of that information ever again in your life. So it's just training you to basically remember things. And because we live in this society, like you said, that is very performance driven, that is very much about ultimately getting results as an employee of a company, the education system, I think, doesn't want kids to be doing this work that we're talking about. If all the kids in the world were basically been taught about death and the things we're talking about, what would they leave the education system doing? They'd leave the education system valuing their own time. Our society is not built around valuing the time of individuals. It's actually not. It's built around property, valuing property. It's built around valuing profit, all of those things. Personally, I'm not like a communist or anything. I love capitalism if it's like in its pure form, where people come up with a good idea, and then if it works and it offers enough value to other people, then okay, they make some money from it. But now we've got this system where it's corrupt. People are, paying off their mates and everything, blah, blah, blah. And we don't value the people in the system. It all comes down to what we were saying earlier, right? The system is designed to kill your creativity. The system is designed to devalue your time and your life unless you step up and wake up and like take your life back into your own hands. And any of us can do that. But personally, I don't think the education system is the place to do it. I think maybe, if you have kids yourself, then yeah, you can teach them this stuff. I think all kids should learn it, but and it would be amazing if the education system did do this. But the way society is structured right now, the system is beyond just the education system, right? So say we introduced all these things we're talking about to the education system. Society at large is not yet ready for people like that. So it would be amazing, but it would be revolutionary as well. I don't know if I'm even making sense now. I've had way too much coffee or something, because I've ranted lots in this podcast, like way more than usual. But
well, to me, it does make sense. And another thought that I'm having in addition to that is it has to start somewhere. And
yeah, that's what. Yeah.
I mean, it would be amazing if we have revolutionaries across the range of all ages, right?
Yeah.
And there are people standing up and going for it.
Do you know what? Yeah. Sorry. You know what it is as well, though? I've thought this before. So ultimately, what we're talking about is individual relationships between that being and life itself. Like, at the end of the day, it's between you and the universe, God, whatever word you want to use, right?
Yeah.
And as soon as you start introducing things to the education system, or you start creating a movement around things, so you can have a revolution and all this stuff, as soon as you do that, it actually risks turning into dogma, basically, right? Because as soon as you say, right, we're going to put education into we're going to put creativity into the education system, this is what it's going to look like, it will become dogmatic. And so, do you know what I mean? And so, Say that again. Sorry, it went a bit funny then.
There will be conditions to it.
Yeah. And actually, there are no conditions, I think, right? Because it's about the unconditional relationship between you and life. And so what I think and what I've tried to do, like actually with some of my work, so my book, Personal Revolutions, kind of talks about this. But anyway, at the end of the day, it's about giving individuals the tools to wake themselves up and to take control themselves. And I suppose the education system can do way less damage, like no question. But as soon as you teach people the same thing en masse, you ultimately end up brainwashing people because you create a culture. So it's about having a culture that is beyond culture almost, but you still need some traditions that are aligned with what we're saying about nature itself, natural laws, awareness of, what mammals need and all this kind of stuff. But ultimately, to kind of wrap up my little rant, it's not about movements. It's not about revolutions. It's about waking up one-on-one. And then you don't need to worry about other people. Because like a thing that happens a lot in it, like people wake up and then they try and wake everybody else up in the same way. But the way that I wake up, the way that I might have woken up to death and all this stuff we're talking about, realness, is a totally different path to you. So if I say, right, well, you need to meditate and then you need to just, whatever I've said in the conversation, you need to, I can't remember what I said, but I went through this process of basically being a bit stubborn and all this stuff. That worked for me. Your way might be totally different. Like you might, I don't know, go skip through the forest and like have a big ceremony with people where you're taking shrooms and you're all hugging and everything. Maybe that's all you need. But like the point is giving people the tools to figure out that for themselves. And and I think, we can have conversations with people and we can guide each other in that way, but it's just helping people to see themselves, whatever that looks like. I don't know if I'm even making sense. I'm going to stop rambling like a lunatic.
I think what I also hear in that is we have this individual accountability, right? And we can inspire each other by doing that. So,
yes, exactly that. Yeah.
I think that's a short version of what I get from that.
Yeah. So if you wake up and you do your own thing and you don't judge other people, you're letting other people do the same thing. And there's conditions we can create, I guess, that allow that to happen. But anyway, thank you for interviewing me on your podcast. We've had a long conversation. How would you sum all this up? Like, obviously, we started talking about death. We've gone down this rabbit hole. And now, basically, we've shown, I think, or started to kind of question whether, society is life-enhancing or not. And it seems like it might not be. But how would you sum all this up? Have you got any final words of wisdom? And where can people find you on the internet if they want to get in touch with you?
Final words of wisdom. Wow. Bit of pressure there.
Final.
Yes. I really invite people to start exploring this topic when they are not in a crisis yet.
Wow.
So that it's safe, that it can be gentle, that you can get familiar with it when you don't have a time pressure. Brings us back to the value of time, so that you can then choose what you do with your time, who your time goes to, what your time goes to.
Have you... Sorry.
Yeah, go on.
I was just going to say, have you got any, are there any exercises or something like that, if someone's made it this far into the podcast, is there anything that they could do, literally do to start acting on this?
Yeah, totally. And I would love to connect with people for this. I host monthly gatherings to talk about the topics in a very taboo-less way.
Wow.
And they're small and intimate settings. I do them in person and I do them online.
Wow.
So I have that group, and there's also a practice of death meditation, which can sound maybe a little bit weird, but it is incredible. It's an incredible tool to become familiar with the process of the dying of the physical body.
Wow.
And that gives people a lot of comfort and understanding. And that has been shown to also really give people this renewed sense for life.
So how do you do that? You just meditate, but you think about how you're going to die and everything.
Yeah, so it's a visualization process.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So that's two quite powerful things. So if people want to go to one of your dialogue group workshop things, how do they do it?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I usually announce my groups through my newsletter and on Instagram.
Right.
And my Instagram handle is at Myrthe.Peters, myrthe.peters.
Right.
And I run a meetup group as well, but I will make sure that you get the links to all of that, so that people can connect if they feel like. And obviously, one-to-one is also possible if it seems like a little bit overwhelming to show up in a group setting.
Wow. Well, I'll share all those links and everything in the show notes. But Myrthe, this has been a really awesome conversation. Like, obviously, we got a bit carried away maybe, but that's given me a lot to think about before I drop dead in a few years or whatever it's going to be. So thank you for that. And
thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much.